Fuck off. And don't greed for other people's things. A person with sweet from behind came towards the commotion place, asked what's going on over there while he was coming. Those people from Spear Guild says damn it, it's the association. They say run. The man who our protagonist was pointed says he won't forget our protagonist face. The man behind our protagonist says consider yourself lucky. That man asks our protagonist what's going on. Our protagonist turns back and look at him. That sweet wearing man introduce himself as Sunghoon Heo. He's a security agent for the Korean Players Association. He'd like to ask our protagonist cooperation for just a moment. Our protagonist says to Sunghoon it seems that red players had an eye on his bags. Sunghoon was speechless and with smile says to our protagonist they're certainly large enough for me to understand why. Sunghoon asks our protagonist do you happen to be player Gigyu Kim, by any chance? Our protagonist talking to someone just what did he do, for he to have placed a bounty on his head. By the way the person who brought our protagonist here was called Sunghoon Heo. Now it shows that person who talking to our protagonist is Taeshik. Taeshik says to our protagonist Sunghoon. Taeshik guess he'll have to double his bonus this month. Our protagonist sighs and asks Taeshik what does he want. Taeshik asks our protagonist what do you think? Did he really think that he would be looking for him? After 2 weeks with no contact in the tower. Our protagonist asks Taeshik is that all? Taeshik say to our protagonist of course not. There's a way for your mother to recover. Our protagonist surprised to hear that there's a way to save his mother now. Taeshik explained to our protagonist the only way to treat an illness with an unknown cause. Taeshik says to our protagonist he can presume what it is, right? An elixir. Our protagonist says an all-powerful potion that can cure any disease. But elixirs are. Taeshik interrupts and says that right. Only 3 elixirs have ever been found. One at the beginning stages of the tower's appearance, is a test reward by Marco Alonso, the first to clear the 50th floor. And the other 2 appeared as clear rewards and gates. Taeshik says to our protagonist he know more about this than expected. Our protagonist says that he looked into it many times. Taeshik says to our protagonist then he won't need to tell him, will he? The connection between the 2 gates. Our protagonist says the maze gates. Maze gates. This type of gate boasts a notorious level of difficulty, thanks to its side distribution of monsters of various ranks, as well as a powerful keepers and frequent traps. But because they're classified as miscellaneous gates, separate from ranked gates, anyone can challenge them, as long as their identities are verified. Taeshik says 2 days ago. The 3rd maze appeared in America. Taeshik says to our protagonist wash up before he leave. His mother would faint if she saw our protagonist like this. Taeshik says to our protagonist he'll cash in everything Have brought and deposit the money without charging fees to your bank account, so leave his bags here. Our protagonist says thanks to Taeshik. Taeshik stressed. He's feeling like picking up smoking again, today. Now scene changes someone talking with our protagonist Kim Yun. Saying that Have done everything he could think of. Our protagonist asks Sunghoon Heo right. It's the Man Association agent talking to our protagonist. Sunghoon says yes that's right. Sunghoon says to our protagonist the department head told me that he should see everything through if he want his bonus, so, Have been put in charge of guiding our protagonist to the gate. And Sunghoon says to our protagonist that the department head has taken care of all the document-related logistics, and all the necessary supplies have been prepared. They can depart right now, so asks our protagonist to follow him. Our protagonist asks Sunghoon wait a moment, please. Sunghoon don't know the purpose, now scene changes to 20th floor. Info tab says you have passed the test. Skill Synchronize. Has evolved into Synchronize E. Gigyu Kim. Level 1. Job Partner of Ego. Unique Ability Link. Can link with Ego's skill Synchronize E. Can use 35% of Ego's power. Our protagonist thinks skill with ranks aren't very common. Though he can still only use 35%, our protagonist can feel the body flowing with much more strength, compared to before the test. Sunghoon calls our protagonist player Gigyu. Our protagonist says yes. Sunghoon says to our protagonist it usually takes around a day to clear the 20th floor's test. Our protagonist replies right. What about it? Sunghoon with confusion face asks our protagonist it hasn't even been 20 minutes since our protagonist went inside. Sunghoon clear his throat and says never mind, shall they get going then? Our protagonist asks what time is our flight. He feel like he used up too much of their time. Sunghoon says that they won't be getting on a plane. Haha. Our protagonist once puzzled to hear that. Sunghoon says to our protagonist they're going to the 5th floor. Now scene changes. The maze tower. Though it isn't common to meet players from different countries inside, due to separated regions, it was an undeniable truth that the tower was connected to the entire world. Now scene changes, 5th floor Korean Hunters Association branch office. Our protagonist asks Sunghoon an elevator inside the tower. Isn't it nearly impossible to get electricity here? How is this operated? Sunghoon explained to our protagonist it's an artifact of sorts that's powered by crystals. Our protagonist can think of this entire building as an artifact. That's how important this place is. Our protagonist thinks just how much are they spending? Sunghoon says we're here. Our protagonist thinks so this the International Transport Portal Management Center. Our protagonist says to Sunghoon he never thought he'd be using an international transport portal. He heard that they're top secrets that are managed by the associations of each country. Sunghoon says to our protagonist not just anyone can use them. Department head Taeshik-oh is much more capable than our protagonist think. Sunghoon says to our protagonist here they are. Our protagonist stands in front of USA International Transport Portal. Sunghoon says now let's see. Sunghoon says to our protagonist let's take a ride in the world's fastest vehicle, shall we? Our protagonist laughs haha you looks exited. Our protagonist thinks in his head can this even be classified as a vehicle, though. Now scene changes to Los Angeles, USA. Sunghoon drives the car and our protagonist looks into some papers. There are high rankers who just announced their participation in this gate raid. USA's Iron Shield. Europe's Athena. And the Demon King of Korea. Our protagonist thinks in his head will he be okay, among people like these. Sunghoon says to our protagonist they're arrived. This is the modern day hell, that's appeared. The 3rd maze gate. Hariwon's maze. Someone says ball you know. Have no clue. Neither us. That unknown person says who's that? He looks Korean. This man named Ball says have never seen him before either. They seems to be part of the association. That man Ball used some unknown skill with his eyes. I think took into our protagonist information something like skill or so. This man Ball hesitate to say that unknown from earlier as a woman asks that man.
Ball what's wrong? Ball says to her. He's only level 1 with no stats, and he doesn't appear to have any unique abilities. Our protagonist taking with the USA security there. And that woman asks Ball you can't even see it with your ability. Ball replies to that woman yes. He's surprised, as this is a first time for him, too. That mysterious woman says is that right? That woman takes her glasses and says his face is my type too. How interesting.
Now scene changes to somewhere in the maze gate. Our protagonist was fiercely fighting with the giant spider. That spider attacks our protagonist with threads. Our protagonist dodges it. Our protagonist orders to attack Sunghoon now. Sunghoon says he got it. They both work as a team to attack the spider. Our protagonist attacks the spider with his sword and stabs the head. Sunghoon also attacks the spider from side. Spider was defeated by 2 of them. Our protagonist says to Sunghoon good work. Our protagonist asks Sunghoon is time for him to leave already. Sunghoon says yeah 15 hours already passed. If he consider the time taken to go back, it would be the best if he leave now. Our protagonist says to Sunghoon thank you everything so far. Thanks to Mr. Sunghoon, our protagonist was able to adapt quickly. Sunghoon says to our protagonist your growth speed was amazing. If our protagonist was thankful, treat him to a meal the next time around. Our protagonist shake his hand and says he'll make sure do that. Have a safe journey. Sunghoon says he'll meet him back in Korea. Our protagonist mark a place. And says looks like everything is cleared here. Our protagonist holding the spray name called Infinite Spray used to mark paths in the gate. A week has passed since Mr. Sunghoon went back. Now he can take care of 3 giant spiders all at once without trouble. But getting used to one type of monster means that our protagonist becoming stagnant. If he wants to get closer to the boss room, a strong monster needs to appear. Scene changes back. Our protagonist thinks while holding a white thread ball what is this? Sunghoon says it's the thread roll of Arachne. It's an item that allows you to return to the entrance of the gate once. It's a gift from director Taishiko. Along with the words to run when he face a monster that's too strong. Don't save it. There's nothing more precious than your life. Our protagonist thinks he have no plans to use it until he get the elixir, even if he die. Our protagonist started once while he's in his thoughts. Our protagonist summons his both swords. Our protagonist says, "Did you hear?" A girl's voice. Lu says, "It's suspicious, master. It would be better to not go." Our protagonist says, "Even if it's a trap, it doesn't hurt to check it out. It might end up being a bigger threat in the future as well." Lu says, "That makes sense." L says, "As Mater wishes." A girl tied down to a tree, she screams loud for help. Our protagonist observes the situation behind a tree, she's screaming for help. Our protagonist thinks it's suspicious. Because why is a young kid like that alone inside the gate? And she's Korean as well. She has an uncanny resemblance to Yoojung as well. Our protagonist thinks, is it an illusion or a polymorph trap? This situation reminding our protagonist of a monkfish. It would be the best if he just pretend that he didn't see that. There's one too many suspicious things about it. Lu says to our protagonist, "What did he tell our protagonist?" Our protagonist turns around. That suddenly calling mom. She's sorry that she couldn't get her mother's hospital bills. Our protagonist holding his two swords and stands where he like frozen without moving. Our protagonist grin his teeth. Lu says to our protagonist, "Master, don't tell me. Isn't that such a plain line? That girl crying while calling her mother." Lu says to our protagonist, "Not even a 9 years old will fall for that." Lu says, "You idiot." Our protagonist rescue her with a lightning speed and cuts the threads with a single move and hold her in hand. Our protagonist says, "You're accidentally separated from your party." That girl says yes. While she was distracted for a second. Her name is Sujing Yoon. And she said that she gained a buff skill as her original talent. As long as someone gains a talent, even a 10-year-old could become a player. But it's quite a tedious thing to have somebody underage to be in your party. However, it's worth it, as there are not many people who possess a buff-type talent, and an original one at that. That's why they brought her to a dangerous place like this. Our protagonist gives her a safe zone placement kit. It's not high-ranked, so it only lasts for a day. But someone that's going to help you might appear during that time. That girl stands on her feet and calls our protagonist uncle. Our protagonist was stunned at once. Our protagonist says yes. That girl asks our protagonist, can he take her along with him? And asks our protagonist with a glowing face. Our protagonist says no. She should know this place as well, but if you're a player, you're responsible for your own life. He can't help her any more than this. And he's not old enough to be called uncle. That girl asks our protagonist once more, holding our protagonist's arm, that she's quite good at supporting. She'll definitely be helpful. She further says to our protagonist it's only been a while since she became a player, so her levels are low as well. Our protagonist can't let her off from his arm. And she says when she told them that she had something called an original talent, she followed them because they said that they'll give me a lot of money if she followed them. Our protagonist says to her his goal is to clear the gate so he won't be going back. It's going to be dangerous for sure, and although we'll split the rewards, he can't give her the elixirs if they ever come out. That girl asks our protagonist, "You're talking me along?" Our protagonist says he's saying this beforehand, but if she's not helpful, he'll hand her off to another party along the way. Because he's not the guardian after all. That girl says to our protagonist, "Thank you." Our protagonist says okay. It's because having a supporter is going to make hunting much easier. It's definitely not because she said her mother is sick, or because she reminds him of Yoojung, his sister. Lu says ahem, as if. Now there's a monster in front of our protagonist. Our protagonist says to her, "Sujung. Bluff." She gives our protagonist bluff effect. And after that our protagonist kills every monster with lightning speed. He defeat all the monsters and system notifications appears. Lu is absorbing the blood of the venom ant. Poison resistance is increasing. It's been 2 weeks since our protagonist met Sujung. And the hunting has definitely become easier. That girl say to our protagonist, calling Oppa, that her level increased again. Our protagonist congratulate her. She says to our protagonist that it won't be long until she catch up to our protagonist level. Our protagonist with weird face says that would probably be impossible. Our protagonist caught something. Our protagonist says to that girl be quiet, that he just felt a presence. Our protagonist hides behind the wall and peek outside. That thing our protagonist saw was that giant guild led by America's high ranker, Iron Shield. The Iron Guild. Our protagonist thinks in his head. If he's a high ranker, he must have felt his presence. Our protagonist thinks he might be attached if he get mistaken as a spy. Our protagonist thinks he must quickly run. Suddenly someone breaks the wall. Our protagonist hides somewhere. Moments later, a giant sword struck down the wall behind which Gigyu was hiding just a few milliseconds ago. That's not something a human can do. The huge sword was just as big as Gigyu. The fact that he could throw such a heavy weapon at Gigyu meant Iron Shield possessed extraordinary power. But, Gigyu didn't panic. Instead, he remained crouched and slowly crawled away. Thankfully, he received no more attacks. Was I mistaken? Iron Shield murmured, confused. Guild Master, what's wrong? Why did you throw Kallian so suddenly? One of his guild players asked cautiously. Iron Shield shook his head and ordered, it's nothing. I think I was mistaken. Please go retrieve Kallian. Of course, sir. Meanwhile, Iron Shield was still staring at the area where Gigyu was standing a moment ago. I'm sure I felt someone over there. Then, the Iron Guild group resumed their march with Iron Shield leading the way. Gigyu's whole body was covered in a cold sweat as he panted. While running away, he only felt the brunt of Iron Shield's power for a second, but it was enough to almost make his heart stop. Had Lu not yelled at him in time, Gigyu would have been cleaved in two pieces by that giant sword. Worried about Gigyu, Su-young asks, what's wrong, Oppa? It's nothing. There is a guild ahead of us, so we must be on the right path after all. We'll just have to be more careful, Su-young asks our protagonist, why are we running away? It's not like we did anything wrong. Our protagonist says to her we did do something wrong. It would be different if we met them normally, but we spied on them. Spying can lead to surprise attacks, so it's forbidden among players. But it's rare for anyone to suddenly attack like that out of nowhere. Here, drink some water. Su-young says thank you. Our protagonist says oh well, big guilds have lots of enemies. Su-young asks our protagonist what do we do now? Do we need to take the long way around to avoid them? Our protagonist says no. We're gonna follow them from a distance. It's actually a good thing, if you think about it differently. If we're taking a same path as a skilled party, it's more like we're taking the right path. Su-young says to our protagonist I see. Now scene changes, our protagonist says see there's also a mark right there. Our protagonist asks Su-young aren't you glad we followed them? Since the Iron Guild killed the all monsters we don't have to fight, and there isn't any danger from traps either. Now we just need to find the boss room first. Our protagonist noticed something that Su-young wasn't there. Our protagonist thinks where did she go? Our protagonist was clueless. Luan L says to our protagonist that something is coming. Our protagonist don't know about it. Luan says to our protagonist dodge it master. Just then, someone jumped on Gigyu from above. Got ya, little mouse. Golden-haired Iron Shield, in his snow-white armor and Kallian on his back, grabbed Gigyu's neck and smiled widely. Gigyu coughed up a spurt of blood as Iron Shield landed on him. Iron Shield's arm was still pushing down on him. The damage from that single stomp was so immense that Gigyu was surprised he didn't faint on the spot. Our protagonist thinks himself that he can't lose consciousness, but our protagonist's consciousness slowly fade away. Someone hit our protagonist saying hey hey. It's Iron Shield. Iron Shield says to our protagonist you've finally woken up. Iron Shield asks in English, who hired you? You little spy bastard. What the heck are you saying? Gigyu couldn't understand a word Iron Shield said. Our protagonist thinks spy. Does he know that our protagonist was the one who spied on him? The high ranker pushed Gigyu down further as he persisted, answer me. Tell me. How did you deceive my senses? What are you? If you tell me the truth, I will make your death painless. Kill. Kill. Please no kill. I can't speak English. Recognizing the word, kill, I'm not a spy. Just hunting. Gigyu begged in his broken English. Iron Shield, unable to hide his shock, Iron Shield muttered, you can't even speak English. Seriously. One of the subordinates said to Iron Shield he could be acting guild master. Iron Shield replies well see. Iron Shield called a man called Rogers. That man says yes, Guild Master. Gigyu quickly realized Iron Shield wanted to communicate with him. Gigyu knew who this Korean player was. That's Korean American. Rogers Han. I remember the Korean media going wild about him entering the Iron Guild. When Rogers Han entered the famous Iron Guild, the entire Korean population felt pride. Our protagonist thinks, does he know me, that I'm a Korean? That man asked our protagonist, hello, you know me, right? I'm quite famous in Korea. Rogers Han says to our protagonist he'll skip the introductions. He know our protagonist were a Korean from this item that was in our protagonist luggage. Everything here is so expensive, huh? Rogers further says he apologized for the rough greeting. Guild Master isn't in the best mood right now. Our protagonist thinks he's being pretty friendly. Putting a translation on him means he wants to talk with him, right? Rogers asks our protagonist why you were spying on our guild and what guild you belong to. Also, tell him how you hid your presence from him and fooled his senses. Our protagonist says this is all just a misunderstanding. He just a plain player. I came to hunt inside the maze of Hariwand. I never spied on anyone, and I don't belong to any guild. And he didn't do anything as foolish as trying to fool his senses. He assumed you all knew I was there, so he thought they're fine with him. Roger Han says yes, I see. Rogers Han suddenly took out his dagger and stabbed Gigyu's thigh. He then pulled out the weapon. Looking down at him without any sympathy, Rogers Han muttered, you must be here for the elixir. I can't believe you thought lying would work in this situation. Not a wise choice. As Gigyu endured the pain, he couldn't help but draw a deep breath. A man holding our protagonist's sword and talks with Iron Shield. Like what unusual sword? He can't see a status window for this sword, and it's so dull unlike its appearance that it won't you able to cut through even the skin of an orc. Iron Shield thinks a while and says we can just let the blacksmith handle it after we get back. Keep it for now. That man says yes to Iron Shield. That man says to Iron Shield, compared to your holy sword Kalyan, this is just a lump of metal. Here Roger Han taking out the potions. Roger Han says expensive potions heal very quickly. Don, they ask our protagonist. That piece of shit pour healing potions to our protagonist and says how many times he stab him, you won't die. Our protagonist is very angry at his situation. Roger Han says to our protagonist, don't make that face. I thought you were using these too frugally, so I'm using them for you. Right. That son of bitch asks our protagonist, so hurry up and spill the beans, bastard. Whose dog are you? Our protagonist with low tone, I told you. He was lying that he was hunting, but he really did come here alone. That piece of shit Roger Han slap our protagonist face hardly. And says you think we're joking here. We already used inspection to inspect your stats before you woke up. Even the rope that's been for you isn't a special item, it's just a normal rope. With angry tone Roger Han says to our protagonist, you think I can believe that someone who can't break free from normal ropes came here all by themselves? Do you think I'm an idiot or something? Iron Shield calls Roger, come here, continue after your meal. That shit Roger Han with annoying face kicks our protagonist's stomach with his foot. And that shit say to our protagonist, you better not start acting up, wise guy. Our protagonist thinks himself that he wouldn't get full of myself. I told myself that, over and over. I realized that I was lacking in many areas after sparring with Taeshik. Conquering the maze-style gay which I have almost 0% chance in clearing. Although I knew it was nearly impossible. I couldn't get rid of the thought that just maybe I could do it. But all I had to trust in was some borrowed power. They simply took away weapons. And I became this powerless. Someone looked into the position where our protagonist was captured. But no one seemed to have noticed them. That woman who tracked the situation says the distance is approximately 2 kilometers. We will most likely be scouting near the checkpoint for a while. That woman asked the masked person behind her. What will you do? That person just remains silent. After they capture our protagonist, they did torture him. In that process our protagonist, fingers and toes severed 27 times. Bones crushed 63 times. Puncture wounds and cuts suffered 121 times and counts of typical abuse lost, at around 200 times. It's been 4 days since he was captured by the Iron Guild. Iron Shield says he's a stubborn one. If he were just a little bit more talented, I might have scouted him from my end. Iron Shield calls the old man Bruce, ask that old man to go bring this man's sword. That old man asks Iron's healed both of them, sir. Iron Shield says just one is fine. I thought about melting and recycling them, but I changed my mind. A man like him deserves to be shown my sincerity. I will kill you with your own sword, myself. Your sorrowful soldiers can act as your tombstone. As you are buried along with a gate that'll go down in history. Quite an honorable death for a player, no. Iron Shield holds Lu and say to our protagonist that he'll send you off neatly. Iron Shield point out the sword towards our protagonist's stomach. And after that Iron Shield stab our protagonist with Lu. Our protagonist eyes like he's passed out. Suddenly system message appears saying your link with Ego, Lu, has been re-established. With synchronization our protagonist body around lights appears. He break the ropes jumps towards Iron Shield and summons Lu to his hands and after that our protagonist directly go for his neck. Everyone who presented there was so surprised after witnessing the scene. And our protagonist moment once stopped because Iron Shield hold our protagonist's sword with his bare hand. Our protagonist was shocked. Iron Shield say to our protagonist so you've been hiding your strength huh? No wonder. I thought I could feel the Demon King's energy I'm not surprised she took an interest in you. It seems like she used you as a plaything. Our protagonist remains silent. Our protagonist thinks he won't even budge. Iron Shield asks our protagonist but how'd you manage to trick the detection? That shouldn't be possible, even for the Demon King. I'll have to get some more information out of you, still. Our protagonist thinks now that it's come to this, it seems I don't have any choice but to use that, do I? I have no clue either what he is up to. That masked woman from THR Athena Guild. Says commence attack. That time Iron Shield still holding our protagonist's sword. Because of the attack she used a arrow pierce through Iron Shield hand and leaves our protagonist's sword. Iron Shield recognize the arrow it's a arrow of Artemis. And calls out Athena Guild out loud. That masked woman appers with her subordinate. And Iron Shield says to her is it safe for me to assume this is a declaration of war against the Iron Guild? Masked woman says to Iron Shield, your sense of humor has improved, Iron Shield. Has there ever been a time when we weren't at war? And the masked woman throws an attack towards Iron Shield. Iron Shield takes out his sword and forms the barrier with the help of his sword. The attack made by the masked woman hits Iron Shield, shield protection. A big explosion occurs. Our protagonist covers the explosion with his hands. Iron Shield calls Rogers and orders to him leave we spy the alive, and keep him restrained. Rogers says to Iron Shield words yes sir. Iron Shield says while holding his sword we'll put an end to this today once and for all. Athena Guild ready for the war. Orders all troops. Prepare for battle. Everyone says yes, sir. The battle between the two big guilds are going. While they're fighting there, Rogers and our protagonist moves to another place. Rogers say to our protagonist I'm getting chills just listening to them. Sometimes I wonder whether they're actually gods. Fighting each other. Don't you agree asks our protagonist. Our protagonist stands with his sword in fighting position. Rogers say to our protagonist it seems like standing up's the most you can do. Our guildmaster told us to keep you alive, but, it wouldn't be weird at all if I told him. I accidentally killed him, while he was on the brink of death, would it? Rogers rush forward to our protagonist with killing intent with speed. Rogers came behind your protagonist and says when he's about to cut our protagonist's head. I can't let you live after you've seen my true self, after all. And tried to kill our protagonist shouts loud. Now, reflect. Rogers was clueless. From our protagonist behind light appears. System says while Rogers about to cut our protagonist. Reflecting damage accumulated. Rogers don't know what to do. And a big blast occurs. Dust around the area clears. Roger fell down our protagonist heavily fainting. System says Brunhart reached its maximum accumulation limit. Is disinterested.
If you want to see the further episodes, support and subscribe to our channel.